Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Vicky, the director of the SPARK program. SPARK stands for Supporting Parents and Reaching Kids. Coming to y'all, welcome. This is for y'all's Thursday update. I started thinking about this week because, of course, it's spring break, and a lot of you, this is a little different because even though some of your kids have been on the hybrid type learning and have been virtually at home, it's still a little different because there's no school this week. And it made me think of what we expect. Things that we expect. Relationships are all about expectations, right? Relationships are one of the most important things that we work with our kiddos and with our significant others and with anybody actually. And when those expectations are not met, that's when issues arise. Or sometimes we expect people to do what we ask them to do when we ask them to do it, for example. And then we find out that they don't, that their timing is completely different than our timing. So when I started thinking about expectations, I thought, we need to really understand, are our expectations reasonable? Are they unreasonable? That's the first thing. And a lot of times we as parents think they're reasonable, but then when we look at the age of the child, or even more importantly than the age of the child is the temperament of the child. Sometimes we have to have that child in our house that we have to tell them to do something over and over again. And other times there's that wonderful child you tell them once and they do it. I don't know about y'all, but I really didn't have that wonderful child that every time you told them to do it, they just jumped in and did it. I usually had to tell them a couple times. When those expectations are not met, we kind of lose our minds, especially if we're frustrated. Or if things are happening that are creating more stress in our life, we really become a little bit, I just need you people to do what I ask you to do when I ask you to do it, right? I know that I'm that same way too, especially with my husband or my significant other. You just go, oh my gosh, why can't you do this? Or with the kids, why do I have to tell you to do something over and over again? I seriously remember one time telling him, okay, spoiler alert, this is no surprise. Every night I'm going to tell you to take a bath, and every night you're going to get into pajamas. Because, of course, every single night they acted like that was a whole brand new thing, going ahead and getting in their pajamas. So let's talk about expectations, and let's talk about reasonable expectations, because I talk about reasonable expectations quite a bit. We all know that it's not reasonable to expect a 2-year-old to do what a 5-year-old can do. Nor is it reasonable to expect a 5-year-old to do what a 13-year-old can do, and so on and so forth. But sometimes it's not reasonable to expect that kid to do that thing in that amount of time that you've given them because of who that kid is. For example, there's a lot of kids that you will tell them to do this, 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 and this. And they walk off and they do one of those things. And you're like, oh my goodness, why could you not do that? I told you to do this, but I also told you to do this, 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 and this. Sometimes we have to understand who that kid is. I know I had one that I could tell her to do 10 things in a row and she would do them. And I had another one that I would literally say, pick up your shoes, take them to your room. I want you to pick out a book and bring it back to mommy to read. And she would turn and she would head off towards the shoes, and then she'd stop and she'd look back at me. And I'd be like, pick up your shoes, take them to your room, pick out a book and bring it back to mommy to read. Pretty soon I'd go back there after 10 or 15 minutes, and there she was playing in her room. And I would say, I told you to go ahead and pick out a book and bring it back to mommy to read. What happened? And she would say, oh, I forgot. Now, for that child, it wasn't reasonable for me to expect that she could do those things in that pattern. Because with her, it was this short-term memory issue that she had, that she couldn't retain all those things. So it wasn't reasonable for me to expect that. So I found that I told her one thing at a time to do. That was much more reasonable for her. So when we're talking about expectations, we have to understand that just because we think it's reasonable doesn't necessarily make it reasonable for that other person. So we have to really understand who it is that we're talking about. For example, it's not reasonable to expect my husband to hear what I'm asking him to do when he's in the middle of something else. So why would I keep telling him or asking him to do something when he's in the middle of something else? I'm going to get the same response, which is he's not going to do it. Because he's not going to hear, he's not going to retain it, because he's in the middle of doing something else. So a lot of times, whose behavior is it that we have to look at? Our own or the person that we're working with? Most of the time when you look at things, your own behavior can be adjusted to create exactly what it is you wanted to create, which is the objective is I want it done. The objective is I want it done. So when we have that objective and we look at that person, we figure out how we can actually get that expectation met. And one of the ways that we can do it is by explaining what our expectations are. We forget many times, or maybe it's not that we forget, maybe it's that we think that we shouldn't have to explain ourselves because, after all, we're the adults. Why should we have to explain anything, right? I know a lot of us feel like that. But again, you look and focus on what your objective is. What's your objective? To make sure they understand that you're in charge, you're the boss, you're the adult, what you say goes? Or is your objective to get your expectation met? So when we look at this, we go, okay, some kids need, most people need your expectations explained. Today, I need you to do this, 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 and this. How can I best help you to get those things done? What is it that you need to do to help you remember that you need to get those things done? For my daughter, I used to have her, she had checklist. It wasn't because I was mean, it was because I knew that that was a tool that she needed to be able to understand and meet those explained expectations. Because let's be honest, most of the time, the reason why we get mad at people or disappointed in people or annoyed at people is because our expectations are not met. But if we have not effectively defined what our expectations are and explained it in a way that they could understand it, then we're kind of setting ourselves up for that. So here's my encouragement for this week. I want you to really think about, what do I expect out of this kid or this person? What's my expectations? And how can I best have those expectations met? Do I actually need to explain more? Because our reality is we have to balance our expectations with our reality. And if you look at your expectation, and I encourage you all to do this, you look at your expectations, make a list of them. Make a list on what you really expect out of your kids, your significant others, your boss, your whatever. Make that list. And then I want you to write down what your reality is. What's your reality? In other words, I expect them to go to bed the first time I tell them to go to bed. Well, what's your reality? Well, it takes 3 or 4 times. So that's your reality. So match up those expectations and those realities. If they are so off balance, I want you to look at your expectations. And just one. Because a lot of times, I'm going to be honest, we have about 10 expectations and 10 realities, and they don't match up, and it throws us off, and we start throwing our weight around. Meaning, we start yelling more, we use harsher punishment, or we do those kinds of things. What I want you to do is look at one expectation that is not being met. Challenge yourself. How can I say this differently? How can I explain it better? Well, Vicky, I've explained it 100 times before. My mom used to say this to me. If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. Or she'd say, how many times do I have to tell you? And I can remember thinking, well, apparently one more time than you have. Keep in mind, I never said that out loud, or I wouldn't be sitting in front of you today. But a lot of times with kids, we have to tell them one more time than we have. We have to explain it in a way that they can best understand it. Because, see, we're not dealing with small versions of us. We're not dealing with robot kids. We're not dealing with your neighbor kid or your sister's kids or your brother's kids. You're dealing with your person. Your person is not broken. They are wonderful and they are uniquely made. That doesn't mean that they're not frustrating. It doesn't mean that sometimes they're not hard to understand. It just means that you have to figure out how best to communicate what it is you are trying to communicate so that your expectation can be met, and then you can have a more harmonious relationship with that child, those children, or even your significant others, or even your co-workers. Explain what it is that you want. Explain what it is that you expect from them. I hope each and every one of you are able to use some of this information that I'm sharing with y'all, and I hope y'all come back in a couple weeks. In the meantime, y'all have a great afternoon and a great week, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you for joining us. Again, Vicky Rine, Director of the Spark Program for Boys Club. Thank you for joining. Bye.